Hi, everybody. I'm Christina Mueller, and I'm here with Aran Goyoaga, and we're going to chat today about her amazing new cookbook. I'm going to try and hold it up with my background here, but this is The Art of Gluten-Free Bread. And this is I don't want to call it epistolary, but it's one of those books where I, as someone who leads the gluten-free and casein-free and egg-free life, was super excited about because it goes into detail about all these different kinds of breads that you can make as a gluten-free or allergen-free baker and how to adjust as needed. So, first, I wanted to start by introducing everyone to Aran. She's joining us from, I don't know exactly where near Seattle, but near Seattle somewhere.
I'm in Seattle.
Oh, you're in Seattle.
Yes.
All right. So not too far from where I'm sitting in Northern California. And Aran, I think, has been on something of a wellness journey like I've been on. I wanted to really just find out, you were diagnosed with gluten and casein intolerance, is that right?
Yes. So I was diagnosed with gluten and casein intolerance in 2010 after about, let's see, my son was born in 2006. So about 3.5 years of first it was Hashimoto's thyroiditis and then Meniere's disease. And so I kind of went back and forth. I actually had given up gluten after I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's.
Hmm.
I gave up gluten just because I had heard about it. And I had a friend who was already in this journey with her son who had his own autoimmune things. But I was never under the care of a doctor or, sort of testing it out. And I gave up gluten for about 6 months. And I actually felt much better. My antibodies nearly disappeared. Then I went back to Spain to visit my family and I ate some bread or, I must have, my family has a pastry shop. So I probably ate something
Yeah.
there and I didn't feel any different. So I came back to the US and I just kind of gave up on this journey. And I was feeling well. I had my thyroid disease was pretty much under control. Fast forward 2009, I became pregnant again. And then I started to have terrible vertigo attacks, hearing loss. So this was it, the trigger for Meniere's disease.
Yeah.
And after 9 months or so of going to ENTs and just different doctors who couldn't really help me in the way that I thought was going to be lasting or trying to get to the root cause of things, I found a functional doctor that mentioned maybe you have food intolerances. And so through him and testing, is when I discovered, the gluten and casein intolerance.
Yeah.
I mean, not discovered, I kind of had dabbled in it, but sort of confirmed.
Yeah.
And because I was feeling so ill with vertigo, it was the necessary information for me to make a complete switch. And I haven't had gluten since then.
Yeah. So that's a real, hardcore shift to go from living the life of a child of pastry and parents running a bakery to being gluten-free. I mean, that's big. So, well, that explains how you've been on this path for a while. But it doesn't necessarily explain how you became a gluten-free baker. I mean, you went to culinary school, you had a whole pathway where you were cooking in professional kitchens. But then what really triggered you to move into doing bread? I mean, bread to me, as someone who's lived the gluten-free life for a long time, it's like, oh my God, like that just seems overwhelming and a challenge. So maybe you saw it that way and were intrigued.
That's exactly right. But I didn't jump into bread right away. So, because I was a trained pastry chef and I had worked in pastry kitchens, then I started a blog in 2008, Canela Vanille. So there I was baking still with wheat. I was still making baking and cooking. And then when I was diagnosed with my intolerance, I started to develop recipes for the blog that were gluten free. And then 2012, I wrote a cookbook called Small Plates and Sweet Treats.
Hmm.
That was also baking and cooking. And so it wasn't like immediately in 2009, I started to make bread. I mean, I tried because like you said, making gluten-free bread is sort of the pinnacle
Yeah.
of difficulty of what we face, right?
Right.
The most difficult thing is to make some sort of yeasted, fermented product. And then also sometimes the laminating. So like that's why croissants are so difficult because they're fermented and laminated. Um, so then in 2019, I published my book Canela Vanille, which had also cooking and baking. There were some bread recipes in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2021, I published Canela Vanille Bake Simple, which was kind of like an extension of the previous book, and its baking chapter, expanded into a lot more recipes. And so when I did that, but that had cakes and cookies and tarts and pies. When I did that, I realized, well, I can even expand the bread chapter in this
Yeah.
book
There's
into
this
a
piece
whole,
missing.
yeah. So it was
Yeah.
kind of like those Russian dolls that, there was like more information and content and recipes within each one that I wanted to work on and expand.
Yeah.
So that was this last book is really the culmination of all the work that I've done in the last 10 years of, you know, testing bread recipes and what I've learned in that process.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I would say, and I don't know why I've turned off my my calendar. I don't know why it's still beeping at me. So I apologize for that constant dinging noise. So that's a bit of a journey just to get to bread. You obviously had dabbled, but then to do a project like this is a big project. When you're talking to someone who's an amateur baker who isn't someone who's trained in pastry or bread, where do you normally recommend that they start? Like, is there a starter recipe? Is it a flatbread? Is it a sweet bread? Like, where do you normally point people towards to start doing bread?
I would say, I mean, if you're following a recipe that's really well written and has context around it, you should be able to even start with a sourdough bread.
Mm.
But if it's intimidating to you, maybe start with something that has a little bit more, that is more forgiving.
Hmm.
So usually baker's yeast based breads have a lot more consistency in how they ferment, the timing. Sourdough starter really widely varies depending on where you are, the type of flour, not only let's say the brown rice flour that using brown rice flour versus sorghum flour, but also even within brown rice flours, like who milled it, where that rice came from, like that's really kind of like that's why it's called wild fermentation. And so I would say anything that uses baker's yeast is probably like a good starting point. And it could be like a sandwich bread loaf or even a brioche or things that to me feel very consistent.
Hmm.
Um, but I would say with bread, you can be a little bit looser with a cake or cookies. When you're making bread, you really have to be committed to the process.
Yeah.
There's no sprinkle this, sprinkle that. I'm going to take what I did before. You really have to follow the recipe as
Yeah.
the
You need a
author
scale.
intended to.
Yeah.
Also, in these bread books, there's so much information in the beginning of the book introduction that you have to really read
Yeah.
because it's important, because it requires, I don't want to make it really intense, but it requires some precision and
Hmm.
understanding of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so if you read the basics and if you've never made bread, like if you just kind of get into the process of bread baking as a general process and what it means to do that and what tools you need, then you should be able to jump to a recipe, follow it to a T,
Yeah.
and then start making your adaptations. And so with gluten free, as you know, all the different ingredients there's a huge variance and inconsistency. So if you buy brown rice flour from this brand or that brand, they're all going to be a little bit different and they behave a little bit differently if they're milled really finely or if they're
Yeah.
stone ground or if they're sometimes you see sprouted brown rice flour. That's also going to react differently. So I would say understand, like I go deep into each ingredient and what I'm looking for and what I use. So when you can go into the recipe, you go kind of like you have the tools that you need to do
Yeah,
it.
and even some of the gluten-free mixes out there, like the pre-made mixes, some of them have xanthan gum in them and some don't, and that's going to impact how you do even your shortcut baking. So it sounds like though that baker's yeast helps you sort of, level the playing field a bit so that you can make what your goal is, your goal bread, whatever it might be, with success.
Well, it means that it's a little bit, it's faster fermentation.
Mm,
And it usually the timing, like how long you have to ferment it. Of course, it depends on like your room temperature and all those things, because fermentation, is affected by humidity,
right.
temperature, all those things. But if you have baker's yeast, which their yeast particles have been cultivated in the lab to give you exactly the same strains every single time that are going to react, they're going to be this flavor profile, this kind of timing. So that's
Okay.
something that it's a little bit more controllable
Yeah.
that versus sourdough starter that has not only yeast, but also lactic acid bacteria in it. So you're like dealing, if you're fermenting it in a little bit slightly colder temperature, you're going to develop a little bit more
There's
acidity
more
versus
variables.
warm. Yeah, it's just like a little bit more understanding of what um, more experience, I would say.
That makes sense. As someone who's tried to make starter, I live very close to the San Francisco Bay, and I think because the moisture level in the air is so high, especially when it's fog season, uh, I have not successfully made starter. And I was chatting with a baker who lives just 2 miles north of me, which is a completely different climate 'cause it's on the other side of the hill. And he's like, look, I started in San Francisco and learning how to be a baker here in this community has taken months because just figuring out the wild yeast has
Mhm.
taken months. And so, and the climate and everything you were just talking about. So I think having that baker's yeast is a great, like, just again, leveling the playing field. I'm really curious because you have some breads in here that are, what you would call laminated bread. How did you develop structure without gluten? I mean, gluten is this amazing stretchy thing. It's very forgiving. Um, I think one of the things as someone who's learning how to be a gluten-free baker has discovered is, bread cracks all the time. Getting the moisture content can be a bit iffy, like you were just discussing, depending on the flours you're using. And if you're using imprecise measurements, that can be another issue. So, what's your process to develop structure without gluten? Is there something we should be paying attention to?
Well, it's the same for bread, but so for most of my breads, I use only psyllium husk powder or flaxseed meal
Liam is magic.
yes, to absorb all the water, hydrate, and provide structure. And it's not elasticity because if you take bread dough, raw bread dough that has psyllium, it's not going to stretch. You're not going to get those window panes that you get with gluten, like when people are like stretching it and it's like see through. You're not going to get that. The bread's still going to tear, but it does stay together when it rises.
Hmm.
Some air will escape, but it does give you structure. But when you're making laminated yeasted breads like croissants, you have to stretch it, and you really need even layers of dough that lock in butter. And
Hmm.
then when you put it in the oven and ferments, the moisture in the butter evaporates, leavens, and the yeast and ferments the dough, so it rises, and then the butter doesn't totally ooze out.
Hmm.
So to do that in my recipe, and I think in most recipes, of course, gluten-free croissants, you're going to find a little bit of xanthan gum. I have found that making it without xanthan gum is going to give you something a little bit more doughy
Hmm.
rather than laminated. I don't love using xanthan gum myself, and I try not to use it, but there are instances where if I'm more focused, okay, what I want is a product that feels this way, then I am going to use it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's flaxseed, or not, sorry, psyllium and xanthan gum is in the croissants and the Danish and all of the laminated doughs. That's going to give it that structure.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that led to two questions for me. One is, you know, you mentioned not being able to do casein. Do you cook with ghee instead of butter?
No, because it's different. It's a different product. And for example, you can use ghee. You can use some vegan butters for a lot of things. But when I have tried making croissants, for example, with vegan butter, it doesn't have the same temperature stability. So it's a lot harder to get the butter not to melt right away as you're fermenting. It's a little bit more temperature sensitive vegan
Mm.
butter or ghee. Um, so that's the one that I feel like you're not going to get if you're looking at performance alone. When I say performance is like I'm like the result.
Right.
Um, I have tried, but it's not like the best. You still, I mean, I think there are some commercial vegan butters out there for vegan bakers that are supposed to be really good, but they're usually just like specific for restaurants or bakeries where they're buying in bulk. I haven't seen anything in the supermarkets
Hmm.
that are that amazing. And I know you wanted to ask me about vegan butters. I don't know if it's a good time
Yeah, yeah, why
to
not?
jump into
Let's
it.
do it.
Yeah, you wanted to know what my favorite vegan butters are, and actually, my favorite one for performance, not thinking health wise,
Yeah.
was the Trader Joe's vegan butter.
Ah,
Always in sticks because those tub butters are usually have higher percentage of water, so they don't. That's more for spreading. It's not so much for baking,
yeah.
but it's been discontinued. So,
Ah,
or I haven't seen it in the. I was kind of researching it, and I found some Reddit post about it. So I was really disappointed. Then there's a German brand called Violife, I think it's called, or
hmm.
Violife, and that has a really good baking vegan butter
Okay.
too.
Good to know.
I love Miyoko's, I think is like sort of the best ingredient, like health wise, if you're thinking about things that are not so harmful for you,
Yep.
that's probably a better one. I have a recipe for a cashew butter in my book, Bake Simple, that you make.
Yep.
It has almond flour in it, olive oil, coconut oil, cashews, and it's fermented and it's delicious to eat. And you can make pretty good like pie dough and stuff with it, but I wouldn't use it for croissants
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, I found I use Earth Balance a lot when I do baking because I find it's very stable and very consistent, but I love Miyoko's as a spreadable butter.
Yeah, and Earth Balance is also I have used it
Yeah.
too.
All right, so that's really good information. So my second question around the psyllium is, so we're all being told to eat more fiber, and psyllium is this amazing prebiotic, which helps you build healthful, beneficial bacteria in your gut and blah, blah, blah. When you're putting together these recipes, some of the recipes I was really drawn to were the ones that have like the heartier flours, like the chestnut flour and the teff flour. Were you thinking about fiber at all when you were putting these together, or was it more just like, oh, this works with this, and it has a beautiful color, or whatever?
I wasn't necessarily thinking about fiber. I don't really always intentionally think about the macros or all these things that people talk about.
Yeah,
I grew up in a family that ate very healthily without really trying to be healthy and just, we ate a lot of beans and lentils and legumes in general. We would have meat once a week, fish 3 times a week, and vegetables every day. So I think those are my choices every day. I'm not necessarily forcing myself this way or when I'm writing recipes, especially bread recipes, I'm really thinking about with this book, I wanted to look at what are all the breads that have not all the breads that have existed in history, of course, but that if I were to build my favorite bakery, what would be in it? So there are breads that are hearty, like the ones you mentioned, like buckwheat and chestnut sourdough breads. There's whole grain breads, but there's also baguettes that are a little bit lighter and they have a higher starch percentage.
right.
Brioche, and rich sweet bread. So for me, it was really I wanted to create a book where if anybody wanted to open it and today I feel like this or tomorrow I feel like this, like they could have options like pita or pizza, but then there's also ciabatta and walnut have baguettes. And so there's like different
Styles.
kinds of
Yeah,
things. It just so
personalities.
happens that I love myself. I love eating food that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, fiber is important. And, I eat lots of it. But it
Plenty.
wasn't like I wasn't measuring it or thinking, oh, I need more of fiber. Or there's some recipes that are very starchy, like brioche is has a really high starch percentage because you are looking for that fluffiness and you can't really make a brioche with safflower
No.
and seeds and like
Please
that would be a
don't.
different bread. It would not be a brioche.
Right. It would be the exact opposite of brioche. Which kind of, I mean, one of the things that really drew me in from my particular perspective is I was really curious about your holiday baking chapter. And I think the listeners will be interested in that chapter too, because you have a huge range of holiday breads. You discuss babka and challah. You do hot cross buns. You do panettone. You do donuts and stollen, which is in my family's tradition. And I don't know if people think of these as breads. I think they're more like in the brioche bread, the kind of crossover space.
Yeah.
But I'm really wondering how you ended down the rabbit hole of these holiday traditions. Like what drew you to them?
I love holiday baking. So, I mean, these are things that I have made in the past in my life, like through my years of working as a pastry chef and even if I didn't make them, I was exposed to them. So I just there's not a better time to bake than kind of those holiday times, I think. So I couldn't have a book without that chapter. I had a holiday chapter in my last baking book too, which it was tarts and cookies and all kinds of things. I think I just love holiday baking.
There you have it.
Yeah. And I try to be, I didn't grow up with challah, but I've been with in communities where we've celebrated Shabbat and Hanukkah and other Jewish holidays. So I wanted to have it, and I love making it. Then I take the challah recipe and I turn it into different things in the book. So yeah, I just love playing uh,
So that's the
around
playful
and like
part.
honoring all traditions.
So one of the things that caught my eye when I was reading the Stollen recipe, because I've tried to make gluten-free Stollen a number of times and I've done okay with it. But your recipe calls for blending the marzipan with egg, and I just went, "Ugh!" Like, that's not how my mom taught me.
How
But
did you make it? I've always seen it with egg white.
so my mom actually, she would make the dough, and then she didn't make handmade marzipan on top of making the dough, so she would buy essentially the log. You've probably seen the logs of
Oh,
marzipan. Um, and then she would just wrap that in the dough. And so that was her shortcut, even though she would make a homemade stollen. And
okay.
when I've made it, I usually whirl my own almond flour and then do the sugar syrup and make the marzipan and then sort of pat that into the gluten-free dough.
Hmm. Um, Maybe in Germany it's differently, but in Spain, in my family's pastry shop, marzipan was always made with almonds, sugar, and egg whites.
It's so interesting.
Yeah. So, um, yeah,
Everyone's a little different. It's just how it
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Um, what would you say is your favorite holiday bread? Like, do you lean towards one or does it depend on the season?
Let's see what holiday. I actually really like semla. They're the Swedish buns with marzipan inside
Mhm.
and whipped cream, and it's a cardamom bun. I love that. And in fact, we're getting into the semla season right now. It's before Fat Tuesday,
Yep.
So um, I will be making them soon. I love them, and I love their stollen too because I love and my book is made with sourdough starter, but it's a sweet sourdough starter. And I love anything that takes a long time to make. I know this is probably deterring from a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want something that takes a long time to make. But there's something about the holidays, like where you invest
Yeah.
time in making something that feels like a project. Like if you were knitting or something, like you're
Yeah.
just kind of spending time with baking. And so I love that. The panettone kind of has a similar process as the Stollen. They're both sourdough. Um, yeah, what else? I mean, I love them all.
I also think like when I look at holiday, what my kids want to do is what we always end up doing before holiday. And then after holiday are like, oh, we didn't get to this, but I'm gonna make it because that's the one I wanted to make.
Mm, yes.
So that's how it is in my house. Um, do you have a position? I mean, I know obviously your book is around doing your own baking and figuring everything out. Well, you've done a lot of the figuring out, but sort of, learning how to be your own baker. But have you ever worked with any pre-made mixes or any pre-made flour blends or anything along those lines? No.
No, I mean, I have used them, but I've never written recipes with them.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like I'd rather focus on individual flours and their flavors and their textures.
Hmm.
I understand the convenience of a mix, but I do think that sometimes, like, not all mixes, like you said, are the same. So you are actually adding kind of an obstacle for some people if they can't get that exact flour where
Yeah.
they are. And sometimes for a cake, it might not make a huge difference because cakes can be forgiving, especially if you have eggs. But for something like bread, you really need to either use only one specific flour that everybody can access, or you really need to focus on individual flours. And I also, because I want to be able to maximize each flour's flavor, texture, its elasticity or non-elasticity. You know what I mean? It's like if I were to use blends, it wouldn't really make sense for my
Yeah.
me as an author. But I
Yeah.
have nothing, there's nothing against them. I don't eat wheat. So that's another thing. So I have to stay away from wheat starch and a lot of the bread mixes now, like the King Arthur and not Char, Caputo, and maybe even Char, but they have wheat starch in them. And
Mm.
so it's something that I have to watch out for, which has made it kind of difficult to eat out because I feel like I have to ask a lot more questions
Yeah.
now of like, especially for bread or pizza, like what flours are you using?
Did
But yeah,
any
but I have nothing. They're convenient, and I have nothing against it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good to know because I feel like that's a really nice entry point sometimes for people. You can get to bread without needing special gear or, purchasing some of the unique flours that you need to really, get into gluten-free baking. I mean, I have them all in my refrigerator, but not everyone is like that. Um, the gift of baking, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I know you grew up in pastry, but I'm wondering how you found the joy in bread because pastry is such a different beast. It's sweet, it's comforting. I think bread can be comforting as well, but it seems to me like you have to pick a lane, and maybe
Mhm.
that's not the case, but how did you find the joy for g getting into bread after your years of doing cookies and all the other things?
No, I love bread, so that in itself, it's what I crave. I actually have a lot more savory palate than sweet.
Mm,
I mean, I love working with pastry and doughs and the precision that sometimes those recipes take. But to eat, I'd rather eat a sandwich. And I love bread. I love texture in bread. So it really wasn't. Um, the only challenge was that I had always worked as pastry chef. Like you said, they were very different. When I was working in kitchens, you had the pastry kitchen and you had the bread kitchen, or the bread department. And we shared the same kitchen, actual
mhm.
physical kitchen, but we had different shifts and we worked independently. Each team had their own employees. And so I oftentimes like overlapped in time with a bread team and I would talk to them and I would watch them, but I never actively worked there. So that is one huge regret that I have that I never, in my last job, I used to work at the Ritz-Carlton. And so hotels, I mean, I don't know now, but hotels used to be kind of where you got the best experience and the broadest of experience because you had all these things that you could do. And I regret not asking to be part of the bread team.
Yeah.
I left before I was able to do that.
Well, maybe that's a good thing because you would have learned all these skills around using gluten,
Mhm.
and then you would have had to forget them all.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it helps in some ways to understand what happens during fermentation and this and that. But yes, you're right. Maybe I would have picked up habits that would have it would have been an impediment to me thinking outside the box or
Yeah,
thinking differently or being stuck in a specific texture and I can't get it, and then I think that that's the most important thing
right.
when it isn't.
Well, and that's something I really valued about your book was you actually give people options. You say, you can make this vegan or you can do, there's alternatives. You also give suggestions for how to preserve the bread if you don't eat it the same day, which I think is hugely important in gluten-free living. Um, Something that I wanted to ask you though, because we're all human, um, do you have any success stories around like, starting a ferment and then, oh my God, you forgot about it and all this time has gone by and now what?
um well, if you've over fermented something, you mean like the final dough is over fermented?
Oh yeah, just like any thing that went wrong in the kitchen. Like, do you have a story
um
of like, gosh, I started this thing and I left it overnight and it was only supposed to be 6 hours and now it's turned into this monster, but I saved it.
oh, I don't. Nothing pops in my head right now, but I know there's a thousand stories. That's how I've learned a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good follow-up. That can be part of,
Yeah. Yeah,
our
I'm gonna
next
think about that
conversation.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely times where I thought that if I left something in the fridge, like let's say I shaped a dough and um I couldn't get to it. I usually plan my day around my dough and not my dough around my day,
Mm.
meaning my bread is priority.
Yeah.
Everything else has to wait. In general, that's me, but there's been times where I thought, oh, I can't. That was in the fridge for 8 hours and then it's going to be overproofed. And then I baked it and it wasn't.
Hmm.
So I've definitely learned how to push the time here and there, how far I can go. Sometimes I don't know because I'm not testing. Maybe even my dough can be in the fridge for 8 hours and yours can be in it for 12 hours and not be overproof because my fridge is colder or whatnot. So there's a lot of variables that affect dough. But yeah, I mean, who has a lot of those is my husband because my husband still bakes gluten bread
Yeah.
and he loves to eat it, but I think he loves the science of it.
Hmm.
But he's not taking note. Well, I mean, he does take note, but he's really like always experimenting, and so he's always pushing his fermentation times, and he's always kind of more like that. I'm more like I know I want bread, and so I better not mess it up. So I'm on top of it, and he's just always kind of learning new things because he's always forgetting about it or
Right.
prioritizes something else.
Yep. I think that's more my style is that sort of chaotic style. Like, oh my God, I have to get dinner on the table now before people freak out. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like people to know about your book or your influences or, anything on your gluten-free journey that you'd like people to know?
Hmm. Well, I think I I think sometimes I come across as like really intense and rigid in how I write my recipes, but I want people to know that is done so that when they follow the recipe, it's seamless for them.
Hmm.
So if I talk really intensely about certain things, it's really because I want to emphasize that these are being following the recipe as it's written is really going to be it's for you for simplicity and do not be afraid honestly of recipes. I'm always answering questions on Instagram. That's the other thing. Yes, you can contact me on Instagram if you're making my recipe
Yeah.
and something doesn't turn out. I send voice memos back, send me pictures. Usually can tell. I'm also dying to know what happened to your starter because I want to help you troubleshoot it. Um, because also through these processes of back and forth, I get to have an insight into someone's kitchen and
Mm.
brain and how they think about stuff that I might take for granted. And in that process, it helps me uh, hone or improve my writing
Yeah.
and how all the things that I have to take into account when I'm writing a recipe that it's going to be uh, easy to replicate in someone's home.
Yeah.
So it might sometimes when recipes seem like there's a lot of information, it's there to help you. It's not there to intimidate. So just, and I know it's not everybody's style to be like super precise, but
Right.
once you do it once, then you can understand the process and then you're like, oh, now I get it. And then you can start, adding your twist or changing the process
Yeah,
slightly.
personalizing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and having been on this gluten-free journey for, gosh, for me, it's been more than 20 years. It's been 22 years. Um, I have a scale, I have measuring cups, I have all the tools in my kitchen, I have the correct baking pan to, keep the humidity right. But you might not be there yet in your journey. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this book is that you can be anywhere on the gluten-free journey and there's an entry point for you. The
Yeah.
lavash cracker, or, like you were mentioning before, there's other ways using baker's yeast to just jump right in. Um,
And if not, just message me
Just
and
message
I'll
me. And
help you.
just so the reader knows, before we started recording, I said to Aran that I tried to make the sourdough starter and it went moldy. And I think the reason is because, we've had a lot of rain in the Bay Area recently, and I set it out on my counter and I live close to the water. And within, the short period of time that it sat there, fermenting, it developed mold. So either I didn't have
So
enough air.
it could be multiple things. It could
Yeah.
be mold usually grows if you, for example, if you hand wash your bowls
Hmm.
and you didn't rinse all the soap off really
Hmm.
well. So then when it's the bacteria and yeast are growing, if there's soap, it kills it. And so then mold can so a lot of these microorganisms like bacteria keep mold at bay. So mold is always around us.
Yeah.
But then if the good ones die, then the mold can take over.
Yeah.
So having dishes that have soap is one, or if your water is not filtered and it has chlorine, that's another one.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's if you are not feeding it the right ratio, meaning it doesn't have enough food, and then it's sort of like the microorganisms die and then mold takes over.
Hmm.
So it could be various things. So maybe in your environment, your starter is really very active and fermenting very quickly, and it might need more food than what you're giving
Right. And so this is my journey. It's figuring
it.
out
Message me.
figuring out a starter that will survive
Yeah.
because I've tried water kefir, same thing, it all died. Um, Before we wrap up, because
Oh,
I've used up plenty of your time here, I wanted to just ask you where people can find you online. I know you mentioned Canel et Vinyle. Um, that's your handle on Instagram. Is that the best way
yes.
for people to find you, or do you prefer a
Yes.
website
Yeah.
or?
I have a website that's arangoyoaga.com. I have some on-demand classes there that you can just kind of download and watch on your own time. Um, but the best way to really stay connected with me is through Instagram. It's Canel Veni. And yeah, people DM me all the time. And even my email is on that in my profile, so you can email me if you prefer. But I record voice memos for people and send like I am constantly doing this.
You're
And I love
involved.
doing it.
You're passionate.
Yes.
Well, Aran, thank you so much for being on my podcast. I look forward to tasting more of your work, and I'm going to stop the recording now and we can keep chatting.